they just all sat with me and they just cried with me. They didn't know my mum. They hardly knew me, but they were just heartbroken for me. And then as a group, we kind of brought that heartbreak to God.
And I just could see like you thinking like, well, where were you? Because there's only one set of footprints.
Yeah, no.
And I just heard God say to me like, I was weeping with your son.
You go through these storms, but if you have faith and you have a relationship with God, you know that there is hope. You know that He's with you in that storm.
Hello and welcome to Together, the podcast. My name's Ian Young and I'm the operations director here at God TV. But one of the greatest pleasures I have is I get to meet with fellow friends and Christians from all of Christendom and find out about their story and what God is doing in their lives. And we get to share it with you at home. So join us today on Together, the podcast is Fi and Trevor.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, I'm looking forward to today, and I know it might be tough at times, so I don't know if you guys are looking forward to it, but I certainly am. Fi, tell us why we're here today, what we're here to talk about.
What we're here to talk about, mental health and faith, hope especially. We have started a business, which we'll talk about later, called We Have This Hope, which has been born out of our own stories and experiences with faith and mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Trevor, tell us a bit about you and your family. Who are you?
Oh, so yeah, I'm Trevor. This is Fi, my wife, my lovely wife. We have two children.
How long have you been married?
11 years this
I was going
December.
to say, ask him,
panicked
that's
for
the
a second
test.
there.
That was really quick.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, I only know that because it was 10 last year. So it's easy to remember 11. You just had one.
Get to like 13, 14.
What's your anniversary date?
15th of December.
Look at that.
Boom.
Well done, brownie.
Yeah. Well done, Trevor.
Did you see the panic in my face?
Yeah. It's still really good.
That's a big question.
We like to group all our key dates in December, so actually you've got a smaller window to remember.
Yeah. Our son is the 18th of December birthday, and our daughter is the 23rd.
Right.
So it's kind of all just there.
It's all within 2 weeks.
What are their
of
names?
Christmas.
So Ren is our son, and Florrie is our daughter.
Shout out to Ren and Florrie.
Yeah, Florrie will love that.
She will love that.
So you're here to, what do you talk about? Mental health
And faith.
and faith. Small subjects. So.
Just two tiny subjects.
Well, I've done a little bit of research and know a little bit about your story, but I don't know where you want to start. I mean, I guess your stories start way before you met. So
Yeah.
you know, maybe Trevor, do you want to start with, you know, your story of like, have you always been a Christian? Have you always known God?
No. No, I grew up in a non-Christian family. We lived in a bit of a rough estate in High Wycombe area. And I was really into football as a kid. Like, I wanted to play football. And my mum used to take me on a Sunday morning to football. And then my older brother, who's 11 years older than me, this is a really convoluted link, but his girlfriend's parents became quite good friends with my mum. And they introduced her to the Alpha course on VHS. I remember it. That's how old I am. And she started kind of getting into it and being really interested. And she started taking me to a Baptist church. And I was like, I don't want to go to church. I was like 12. So I want to play football. I don't want to be here. But thankfully, became quite good friends with some of the other young people there. There wasn't many. There was about 5 of us. One of them is still my best friend to this day. I was his best man. He was mine. And I was kind of like, I kind of knew there was something different about it, but I still wasn't really interested. I was chasing girls and listening to rock music and doing things I probably shouldn't have been doing on the weekends with my friends in town. And then my mum volunteered to be a delegate from our church to go to this thing called Leading Edge, which is like a Baptist festival. It's like New Wine, but much smaller. And I was in the youth stuff there, and it was run by a charity called Vis-a-Vis. And I remember the preacher, his name was Chris Simpkins. He was preaching one evening, and I was probably about 16. And I remember before the preach started, a girl came up to me and kind of said, like, I just feel like I've got a word for you. And I'm like, all right, what the heck do you mean a word for me? Like, this is weird. And she said, I think you're going to be a leader, and I think people will follow you. And I was like, okay, thanks, I think. I didn't really understand what that meant, but it was fine. And then the preach happened, and it was, your standard kind of, this is who Jesus is, do you want to be his friend? And I'm sitting there going, I don't want to be his friend. Like, this is weird. I don't want to do this. And I remember him doing a call to altar kind of thing. Like, if you want to give your life to God tonight, stand up and come down the front. And I'm sitting there like, I don't want to do that. And I remember looking around and I'm like, hang on a second, I'm stood up. And it was like, whoa. And I remember walking forward and it was kind of the first thing. So obviously there was things that attracted me to God and I wanted to know more. But I don't think I necessarily fully got it. I still made a lot of mistakes as a teenager. And
How old were you when you...
About 16.
Okay.
So I was still young and, influenced by my friends outside of church and, almost scared to say that I'd become a Christian because I knew what people would say, like Bible basher and all that jazz, back in the day. And it wasn't until I was a bit older. But I remember though, when I was 16, after I got back, my friend Josiah and I, we went to this, what is now our current church, youth group. And I remember on the second time I went, this guy came up to me and was like, his name was Phil, and I actually play drums with him now. He's a pianist in our worship band. He came up to me and said, I've got a word for you. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like, I just feel like you're going to be a leader, that people are going to follow you. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. Like, what on earth? This is just strange. Like, this man has said it. He's never met this lady that spoke to me at this previous place. So it was kind of like things were starting to unravel a bit in terms of like my understanding of God. And I kind of was understanding a bit more. And I got the opportunity to go to Kenya when I was 19. Went out and I met with some amazing people in this rural community in southern Kenya. And I think that was like one of the big stepping stones that changed my view on my faith. Like, these people had nothing, but their faith was so strong. And we went to visit people's homes and they were widows. They had nothing. They had a tin roof and a mud hut. But you get in and on this table is loads of Coca-Cola and Fanta and Sprite bottles that they'd spent all of their money on to give us a drink. Right. And I just remember being really impacted by that. And when I came back, I got offered the opportunity to be a youth worker at the church. So it was this amazing kind of, over the space of 3 or 4 years, my life really changed from not really getting it to like, oh my word, I'm so impacted by this. And like, I want a bit of what they've got in terms of that faith, to then being a youth worker.
Where does the beautiful Fi fit into? When did you meet Fi?
Oh, so Fi, that's an interesting story. So I was in a band playing drums for your brother, actually. And
it's always the drummer.
And I was playing drums for him and I was probably about 17, I think. And we used to take the mickey out of him, me and the other guys in the band, saying that his sisters were really attractive. And it really wound him up. So we just did it more and more. And then I took the joke too far. And I remember when we told him that we were going to have our first child, and he just came up to me one time and went, all right, joke's over now. It's fine. I get it. This is really funny. And I was like, I'm sorry, Phil. But yeah, so that's how we met. And like,
so how old were you when you met?
I was 18. You were?
I'd have been 21.
Yeah.
And where did you meet? The church.
We'd met on and off over the years through my brother.
Yeah.
And then we
met in a pub
the week before my brother's wedding, and then you asked me out at my brother's wedding.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
that's a class first date, isn't it?
Well, you know what?
My family.
Let's just get this over and done with. Let's meet the entire family.
Grandparents, aunties, and uncles.
I still get mocked for the fact that I kept calling your dad sir. It's like,
you're very respectful.
I was.
That's very nice. You probably quite liked that, right?
Yeah, you were a bit interesting, weren't you? You're a bit older than me, and it was you were in a band. You was a drummer. Like, what's not to love?
Wow. So, Fi, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. Did you grow up in a Christian family, or is it something you found along the way?
So I grew up in a Christian family. My parents are both found Jesus before I was born, and so I kind of grew up. I don't have like a conversion moment. It was very much like throughout my whole life, kind of just moving closer towards Jesus and deepening my understanding and my relationship. So, as a child, I was very anxious, very nervous, kind of from really young. And so my mum, who was very spiritual and kind of she was very charismatic in her sort of background, and
You're smiling, and what do you mean by
like,
very
she
charismatic?
Would wave banners and speaking in tongues and which to me now, it makes total sense. But as a small child, I was just like, what's mummy doing?
Right.
Why is mummy speaking gibberish?
Did you ever ask?
I did, yeah. And she would explain it to me. And then I was like, okay, so how do I speak in tongues? And she'd go, oh, well, you just sort of open your mouth and the words will come out. So I remember in my bedroom being like, it's not working.
Right.
It's not working. And I remember how she'd put her hands up in worship and I'd be pulling on her arm, being like, what are you doing? Because I was so nervous and kind of anxious of what was going on around me, and what she was doing seemed quite strange. But I always had an understanding of who Jesus was. And I think I just kind of gradually grew into it. As I would get older, I would, kind of encounter the Holy Spirit and understand more, and probably even more as I study and I learn more, because I'm a theology student. I just
it's tough doing it. I'm just like, oh, okay. I bounty you.
I find even now, like, I'll come back from a lecture, or we go on residentials, I'll come back and I'll just be like, I just know Jesus in a different way, or in a deeper way. And so I feel like there's this theological term called theosis, which is the idea that you never stop moving towards Jesus. Like, there's always, no matter how far you get in your journey from when you're just converting, like, or to your deathbed, there's always space to move into deeper, more intimate relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And I think for me, I didn't have a conversion point. I just feel like I'm on that journey.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know some people that have felt a bit lost in that, because I'm like the opposite. I didn't know God till I was about 28. So, and what it wasn't part of my life, So, like, when people say the Lord's Prayer in church, I'm still like, do I really know that yet?
They changed the words as well.
Yeah. And
I had to sing it in primary school. Right. We had a special tune that I've never heard anywhere except for the school I went to. Yeah. And we used to sing it.
And I've been in church, for scouts or church parade, but not ever really understood that this was about a God, and going to church was about worshipping Him. And I know that when people then ask how did you meet God? Like, I have like a supernatural experience. So it's like this big thing in my life. It's changed everything for me. Yeah. But honestly, I think there's something beautiful about having always known God. Like, if I ever have children, that's my hope for them. That they grow up always knowing who He is. Yeah. And that they have that choice sooner in life. Yeah. I like what you said as well, like that you're always moving closer to God. Yeah. But as a theology student, I might correct you, because you said until death.
Oh, wow.
But maybe when you die, that's when you get the closest.
Of course. And that's a massive part of actually what we...
You can't get closer than that. That's the thing, isn't it?
I think sort of right from, even if you don't know God, everyone is created in His image. And so there's always that inner part of you, whether or not, because we live in a broken world, you acknowledge it or you know it or not, there's something in us that yearns for that relationship and that yearns for that closeness, in the way that we were designed in the beginning to be in constant communion with our Creator. It's like creator and created. And so even if you don't know Jesus, you're still, there's that point, that spark within you. And whether you kind of move further away or closer, but there is that journey until we are united again, until we are back to the way we are supposed to be, in that close, intimate relationship, which could only come, in the new heaven and the new earth. So, But I used to wrestle with it. I was like, oh, it's so boring. I've always known Jesus. Like, what kind of a testimony is that?
Because I've heard people say that, but actually, I just love you owning it, because it's a hope that I would have for my fantasy children that haven't happened yet.
We always pray with our kids, and we've stolen something from Danielle Strickland actually that we heard at New Wine, which she did with her children, which is like every night before they go to sleep we'll pray, and the last words we say to them are, God made you and He made you good. Like, we just want them to know, like,
that's their identity.
You are good. Like, you're
God's
made
very good creation, and that is primarily who you are.
And it's like, even no matter what happens during the day, our kids can be nightmares, as everyone's kids can, I'm sure, at times. But you make sure that you end with them knowing that they are good and they are loved. And that's just something we've always tried to do with them.
Yeah. And how do you see that impacting them?
For Florrie,
Ren, nothing.
it will come for him. He's the 3-year-old.
All right, yeah, he's still. I mean, he thinks he's SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
For Florrie, who she'll be 9 soon, we've really tried for her to understand that she is loved unconditionally by us and by God, and that nothing can change that. So I think when we talk about, I've started talking a bit more like, when Mummy and Daddy say that at bedtime, it's because you were created by God, and he thinks you're so precious. We look at like Psalm 139, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He knows you inside and out. He knows all the bad things that go on in your heart or in your mind, and he knows all the good things, and he still loves you, and he's he died for you. And also that, Mummy and Daddy aren't perfect, but we love you unconditionally. There's nothing you can do to make us not love you, which is good because she's quite a precocious child. And so when she is, she's quite very intelligent and strong-headed. And so when you're having arguments, she's like, well, you just don't love me. And you're like, no. And so you're laying that foundation constantly that you are loved even when you feel like you're unlovable.
I also feel though she has a better understanding of Jesus than I had as a child.
Yeah.
Like sometimes she'll just come out with stuff and it's like, yeah,
She's
actually,
really-
that's
yeah.
right. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Like, thanks, being schooled by my 8-year-old. But it's great in that sense though. Like,
Yeah, it's really. I was really encouraged last night. So I have a friend staying with me. He's called Michael, and he has a 14-year-old daughter, and she's the closest thing I've got to a teenage girl that actually really likes me. Wants to hang out with me because I'm cool Uncle Ian, right?
Yeah.
So I have a niece who's 15 as well, but I don't think she thinks I'm cool, right? But Evelyn for sure loves hanging out at my house. Always asks her dad, "Can we go see Ian?" And I like to little things like when we go shopping, I'll just put whatever she wants in the and she just likes that.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And do you want to go in town and get your hair done or whatever? We just have a really nice time together. But she doesn't know Jesus, and we were chatting last night, and she had that in. You were talking about that people have an innate sense that of I guess a soul, or that they that this isn't it, and she was talking into that just on her own accord. I think because I work for God TV, and I'm talking with Dad, and God is always on my lips. So she's sort of asking about that, and what I found was really interesting is she had this innate sense of being that you talked about, that there's more than this. And she was willing to discuss if there is a heaven, why is it based on God's grace, is what she's asking me. Why do I have to give my life to Jesus? Why isn't it just good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell? Well, all of a sudden you're in a deep, not just theological, but you have to try and explain, what is bad and good. And and in part, what I've learned from what you've said, and it's just my takeaway from that little bit for everyone at home, is perhaps the better conversation would have been to told her what God thinks of her, rather than me try and navigate this massive theological conversation with someone that has no theological understanding at all.
Sometimes they're the best though, aren't they?
Oh, it was cool. It was a really cool conversation, and strangely, she was more willing to accept that there was either a God or aliens than that there was nothing.
Yeah.
And that was actually really, even though they're two wildly different things, she's like, it makes more sense that there was aliens somewhere that put us here. And I'm like, well, what if that alien was God? But she was more willing to accept that. And I think that's a really encouraging thing about the next generation is, I guess, our generation, I don't know how old you are, but I'm guessing you're a little bit younger than me, right? Not a lot, just a little bit.
I'm mid-30s.
Yeah, I'm early 30s.
Early
now.
30s.
I'm late 30s. So
We're in the
same generation.
We're in the same.
Yeah.
We're in the same group. It's fine.
But they I guess we got Jesus taught out of us, especially we went through the whole where Jesus was removed from schools, etc. But now because there's no God, like kids are seeking in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm just really encouraged by that, you know, at 14, everyone's got all these questions of life. And I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought I'd get this conversation.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's really encouraging.
So we'll call you when Florrie gets to that.
Oh,
point.
Do you know, for my sister, I am the guy that answers all the difficult questions
Yeah.
that Tracy doesn't want to answer.
Yeah.
So that's the only time the kids call me. I'll see like Mia or Isaac or Jakey, and it'll be like, Ian, Mum says I've got to ask you, and it's always like the really like Tracy, you've got to.
We have friends that are
We have
non-Christians.
friends who they'll voice note us some really like difficult questions, and you're like, right, okay, I'm just in the middle of baby bedtime, but I'll call you back.
So before we talk about like what you're doing now and how God's using you now, we've glanced over, I guess, the difficult parts of your story.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Which has been nice to get to know you. But I wondered if like you were willing, like, just to share some of your struggles, because we know Jesus, like you said, it's constantly getting closer to Jesus.
Yeah.
I know that that's like not your reality, and like from being quite young, even as 3, you've had I don't know what to call them, challenges, I guess, that you know, like everybody does in life.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, from about the age of like 3 or 4, I had OCD, or like I had OCD tendencies. So that's obsessive compulsive disorder. So I remember being at what would have been preschool playgroup, and we were learning about germs, and they were also talking, I think they were talking about like plants dying as well, and it was probably a bit of a dodgy lesson plan, but somewhere like the wires got crossed, and because I was quite just a generally anxious child by nature, I was like, okay, so if I have germs, and then the germs are going to kill me. So from really young, I was washing my hands, 3 or 4 years old, washing my hands repeatedly because they didn't feel clean. I had these germs on my hands. And so my hands were like red raw. And I remember going home and my mom giving me a sandwich and not wanting to use my hands, touch it, like trying to eat my food like a dog because I wouldn't like. Right. And so that was like, I would have been 3 or 4 before I started mainstream school. And although it kind of petered out, and I think that was quite a visible thing for my parents to see, those sort of OCD tendencies stuck with me throughout my whole life, really. You can kind of manage them and learn techniques and stuff, but from being...
How would that manifest? Like, you know, you've given the story of the 3-year-old, like at 6 and 10 and 15.
Yeah.
How can you give some examples?
Yeah. So I think OCD tends to manifest in different ways at different points as well. So, you know, there's this stereotype of like, oh, people are really tidy or organized or can't cope with that. And that's only one like avenue of it. I wish I was the tidy one.
I was going to say, your husband's laughing, so I guess you haven't got that tendency.
Nah, honestly, that one skipped us, unfortunately.
No, definitely not the tidy one. But it would, so OCD is like intrusive thoughts, thinking that your behaviors have a kind of an influence on outcomes. So say like people, you think, if I don't do this, someone's going to die.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that could be like different things. So some would be like routines, or you hear sometimes people like flicking light switches or counting.
What were yours, Fee?
So for me, I had the hand washing when I was young, so that was sort of germs and the cleanliness thing. And then as I got older, it would be, I would have little routines I'd have to do because I felt like as somebody was leaving, or they're going to die if I don't like count this many things or do this little routine every time somebody leaves the house. And I'd always had separation anxiety from my mum. I was the 3rd child, and there was quite a big age gap between me and my siblings. So I was very much like, I'd have all of mum's attention and really close. And so whenever we would go out in public anywhere, I had this absolute paranoid fear that something bad was imminently going to happen to her, like she was going to be mugged or someone was going to attack her. If I went out with other people, with my dad or my friends' parents, I was relaxed and I was fine. But if it was my mum, then I was terrified. And so it all kind of played into that. And then as I got older, more into an adult, it was like safety behavior. So like checking things were locked, turning the oven off, checking like the boiler for gas leaks, all this kind of stuff. So look, like when we were first married,
I'd have to kick you out of the living room.
Me trying to lock up the house before I went to bed it would just take forever. I couldn't stop checking things.
Well, I would send you up, and then I would go around and check it once, and then I'd go upstairs and I'd be grilled. Did you shut the door? I'm like, yes, I did. But it was like sometimes you'd say it to me, and I'm like, I did, but like now I feel like I haven't. So then I'd end up going back downstairs. I'm like, I shouldn't have.
Yeah, but I think the crux of it was that I felt like I needed to keep people safe, or that something bad was going to happen, and so that was really, it was a fear of kind of death or trying to keep people safe, whether that was myself or my mum or somebody I loved. Like that kind of thing happened during pregnancy with our first child. My OCD got very bad because again there was a whole other new life to look after. But a little bit before that, when I was 18, my mum died of cancer, and so what had happened?
What was your mum's name?
Denise.
Just wanted to.
Yeah.
Hey, Denise.
It's funny, isn't it? When it's been a long time, you don't use their names.
Yeah.
It's been about 15 years. So it's almost been nearly getting towards half my life that she's not been around. So it's funny to think
Tell us just one really lovely thing about your mum before we carry on. I just want to honour her for a second.
She was an amazing artist. She was a ceramicist. And she would make these beautiful big pots, and she never made a penny from her art, but that never stopped her. She went to uni and did her BA when I was probably about 10 or 11, and because she'd never done that before. And so that's really given in my life, really, I've gone to uni. I started uni 3 years ago, and because I'd never been before we got married and had Florrie when I was 23. And so it gave me that permission to be like, I can be a mum and go to uni and do this stuff for me. So yeah, that was a real
So what
influence.
happened when the thing that you've always been fearful of happened? So your mum died when you were 18.
Yeah.
She died of cancer, right?
Yeah.
So then how did that impact you? Like what happened right there and then, like to your family, to you, to your relationship? Because I guess that was about the time you met.
Yeah,
6 months
6
in.
months
Wow.
yeah. So I think on the whole, even though the OCD was in a bit of a low period at that point, it was just a reinforcement that, bad things happen, essentially. So even though, I guess with the OCD, it was always you trying to stop things from happening or feeling like you're trying to have some kind of element of control. And then when mum died, and it was like, when we prayed for healing, we prayed for this, and it was just that, okay, so these things that either you think only happen to other people, or you think, well, we're praying and Jesus will heal her. But I think that was part of the problem with my life growing up, having this OCD and these kind of anxious tendencies. My mum would be like, oh, we'll just pray. And because the Bible says, don't worry, we'll pray. And although it's sound, but because of this, the way my brain worked with the OCD, Jesus became a bit like a magician. So it was like, if we do the right thing, then Jesus will make it better and we don't have to worry. And so praying was become a compulsive thing. And the OCD kind of thing saying, oh, you've got to do this in order to keep that person safe became very twisted in with what I thought maybe was the voice of God, or like, oh, well, the Bible says if you pray, they will be healed. And so, but then you've got an OCD voice saying, if you do this, then they won't die. And so you can see how it gets so intertwined. And so that took a lot of unpicking. So when mum died, it wasn't that I felt responsible, anything like that. It was more just a realization that bad things happen, and just because you pray, I absolutely believe God heals, but at the time it was like, he doesn't always, or not. I've come to a greater understanding of it now, but he doesn't always. And how do I go forward knowing that these things can just happen? And so I think going forward and going into we got married quite young, well, not maybe for some Christians, but like, it was,
How old were you when you got married?
I was 21.
20.
You were 20.
Oh yeah, you were old.
Yeah, we'd been. I was 24. We'd been
Yeah.
together like 4
No,
years.
you were 25. Yeah.
A couple of years.
We've been together about 4 years, which was, but I definitely feel like I was rushing to want to get married and have children, to have something to kind of focus on that I thought might make me feel better, because I had this grief and this gaping hole, and unsurprisingly, putting quite a lot of pressure on by having a child doesn't make grief any easier. Actually makes it really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was my journey up until that point. That this suddenly realization of I don't know how to rectify bad things happening, and my faith and where that left me, really. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's a sad story, but there's one thing that I'm more and more convinced of is you'll see your mum again
Yeah.
in heaven for sure.
Yeah.
I went to a brilliant service last week in America that was all about, what happens when you die, and it is incredible.
Yeah.
So like I want us to be encouraged by that, but
Yeah.
I want people at
Yeah.
home to also be encouraged that, if you have any doubt that there's a heaven, and if you've given your life to Christ, that you will end up there and you will see those people again. You've got to get back on that theology, because that's the hope in Christ, isn't it?
And there's some incredible stories around there of people experiencing heaven.
Yeah.
And stuff.
I think that was the starting point, actually, even though it was a really dark time. I sat down with a friend, and who wasn't a Christian, and she said that I don't understand how you're managing to cope with this. And that it was a real moment of clarity where I was like, actually, if this happened to you, I don't know how you would cope, because I know where my mum is, and I know that this isn't it. And the more I've wrestled with it over the years, and I used to have a poor view of heaven, because heaven meant somebody had died.
Right.
And so that heaven effectively, whether consciously or unconsciously, signified being separated from somebody on this side of it.
Right.
And then when I came to just getting overwhelmed by the darkness in the world, whether it's people dying, cancer, you don't have to look far to be overwhelmed by everything. To know that even though you don't necessarily know what heaven is going to be like, to know when you look in Revelation, where it's like there will be no more pain, no more suffering, God will wipe away every tear, to know that heaven is the complete opposite of our experience right now, then started to become good enough for me to know I don't quite know what it's going to look like, and there's a mystery in that, but knowing that how I'm feeling when I'm in my absolute depths of despair, it's going to be the opposite. And that gave me hope.
I think one of the things that I remember from that night after your mum passed away, is we all sat in the living room, and your dad had a whiskey and he had some friends around. You were telling amazing stories, but one of the things your dad said in that time was, she's now restored. She's now got her perfect body back. And I'd never thought of it that way. And that stuck with me for 15 plus years now. And it's just such a really amazing way of seeing it. Like, he'd just lost his wife that day, but he was almost rejoicing that she was no longer in pain and that she had her perfect body and she was with Jesus. And I just thought that was incredible to see.
It's for me, it's been very much unpicking the theology of like a child's theology of like heaven good, hell bad, one up, one down, clouds and a king, you know. And like even only, sort of, because even if you don't know God till you're 28 or whatever, you kind of have heard those messages at school of a really a child's version to understand it, which I understand why we do that, because you can't be teaching your 3-year-old the theological, well, maybe your 3-year-old.
He sits down with a pipe.
Completely gets it. But like learning about what heaven actually is, that it's a state as much as a place, like it's a promise. Heaven is a promise rather than this specific place in the clouds. It's incredible. And sometimes that's where death takes us. And
I think there's the verse that says, like, behold, I am making all things new. And I had another moment of revelation where I think I was in a lecture and they were talking about the resurrected body. And I think it was Lucy Pepiat, who's the principal of the college that I'm at, WTC, and she's amazing. And she was saying, God is making...
You get better grades now, by the way.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
God is making all things new. He's not making all new things.
Right.
And it was just so... Hang on, it changes everything. When you think, oh, heaven's going to be totally different, we're not going to know what it's like. It's going to be... Are you going to know people? Are you going to be united? And that's like, if God was making all new things, it would be totally different. But he's making all the things that are currently, we know, he's making them new. He's restoring them. So restoration can happen this side of heaven and people are healed. And we've, seen testimony and witness to that. But also restoration, the ultimate restoration happens after. And so it's a case of, I think we're real firm believers in actually now following Jesus does not make things easier. It doesn't make you not go through hard times. And so often we've had people saying that, what about the hope, like kind of always like hope and things being kind of light and positive. And actually we don't particularly want to focus on positive this in circumstance, because actually the whole point of what we're doing, which we'll talk a bit more in a minute, is that this hope that we have is in any circumstance. So actually, even if you are in a desperate circumstance right up until your last days, you can still have hope. So it's not about saying, oh, we've got a really easy life now, because just sort of finish off like my testimony, my dad's testimony. He lost my mum Denise, his first wife. He remarried, and then a few years into his second marriage to a lady called Rhoda, she died of cancer in the exact same way.
A week apart, wasn't it?
A week apart in the like dates wise. And now, and this is more raw, a few months ago we found out he has cancer. And so it's like there's his circumstance. Yes, there's been pockets of pure joy and love and, grandchildren, all this stuff. But his story is not a story that God has made everything better. He's lost 2 wives and is now facing the same disease. But does he still have hope and assurance of what is to come for him? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, come on.
And so that's what this hope is. That's what why we're doing what we're doing, because his, who knows what God's plan is for him this side of heaven, but we know what the plan is outside, like beyond that. And so that's kind of what we're doing with this hope. So
Cool. Thanks, Fi. There's so much I could say. I mean, maybe we just let that sit.
Yeah.
And if the people that are listening and watching at home just, this. I guess for me, it's like, I know your ministry is called This Hope, right? But that's what you're saying is, we need to lift our eyes and have an eternal perspective, because this life there will be troubles.
Yeah.
Ye though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, something like that, I will fear no evil.
Yeah.
And the messages of faith and hope. Thanks, Fi. So, Trevor,
hello.
you follow that?
Yeah, I know, right?
I think the message there is you best have a good story.
So I'll leave.
Yeah, right.
I suppose my story kind of starts back in my childhood. We were homeless at one point in my childhood and moving around from house to house and living in all these really rough areas, and a lot of stuff that I experienced as a kid. Like,
Can you share how you were homeless? Like, how old were you?
I was 6.
Wow.
So but because I was 6, we weren't allowed to go onto the streets. The council put us in a bed and breakfast.
You say aloud, like,
yeah, I know.
I want to be,
No, go over there.
Yeah.
But because of my age, we were housed. In this bed and breakfast. The positive for me.
What was the circumstance that got you there? Do you know? Have you ever found out?
So we were living in what was my grandfather's house, and then my mum took it on. My mum and dad divorced, and
All right, okay.
basically, I just think money issues led to us losing the house. My problem is I have a terrible memory of my childhood, and I found this out during therapy, which we will talk about. And but like I think I repressed a lot of what happened.
Right.
But like for me, there was a positive in the bed and breakfast because it was next to my school, so I could get up later. You know, that was nice.
Yeah.
But like I remember it was dark and dingy and horrible, and it was a rubbish time. And we moved kind of around and ended up in this really rough estate where we lived for like 14 years. And just before kind of Fi came into my life, actually probably about 17, I remember walking home one evening and there was these lads and I was just like, oh, here we go. Because I could just sense that something not great was going to happen. And one of them came up and was like, oh, fresh meat. And in my head, I was like, fresh meat? I've lived here like 10 years. Like, you've just never seen me. And one of them tried to do that whole like shoulder shoving, I'm a hard man kind of thing. And I just stood still and he fell into a car. And as soon as I heard him hit the car, I had a bike drop and I was like, all right. And I just ran. And I remember I lived in a masonette, so I lived kind of lower than street level. And I remember getting into my garden and jumping off this wall and just like banging on the door to open it up. And a couple of minutes later, we found one of them in our garden with a brick, about to put it through our window and stuff. But the estate was so rough, the police wouldn't come down unless they had multiple cars because they knew that it wouldn't be worth their while. And I remember that was just like really kind of upsetting in terms of like, I've just been threatened with violence and the police won't even come and help. Who are the people that are supposed to help us? But like, I remember there was a time I was in town and I saw these guys and one of them came up to me and was like, well, we're coming for you. I was like, and I remember I've never been this brazen. I'm not a fighter. I'm a musical theatre kid. I remember I remember standing there and the words coming out of my mouth were, well, come on then, let's do it now. Like the two of us. Like and he was like, no, we're coming for you. And so, okay. And then I remember I'd been at church all day for a kind of children's event that we were running at church, and myself and Josiah got roped in to help. And I was going to see my friend's band that evening in Wickham. And I met everyone in McDonald's, as you do when you're a teenager. And beside McDonald's was this alleyway that led to where the venue was. And I remember seeing some of these guys, and there was a lot of them. There was like 20 of them, if not more. I mean, my memory, I say, is a bit hazy of it. And I could see they'd spotted me. And I knew that I was in trouble if I didn't do something. And I remember turning to this guy who was a friend of mine called Aaron, and he was like 6 foot and built like a house. And I remember saying to him, I was like, I need you to get me out of here. Like, I need you to do this. And he thought I was messing around. So I've walked out of the side door thinking he was behind me. And I get tapped on the shoulder. And this guy, I turn around, it's not Aaron. I got punched. I remember that much. And then I woke up on the floor. And I don't really remember anything other than that. But apparently it was like 10 minutes. They took turns, about 6 or 7 of them kicking me against the wall. So I remember getting up and walking back into McDonald's, as you do, and walking through the kind of thing. And I remember the people behind the counter were laughing at me at what had happened. And I was just like, this is not good. So I went in the toilet and I had blood all over my face and things. That was pretty awesome. No, awful, pretty awful. And you know, went to hospital and had all that. And luckily, I had concussion and things. But like, there was moments though that kind of in the following of that, which were really strange. Like, my mum wanted to go back to a party that she was at, so I ended up back at this party, my mum's cousin's house, and I'm just sitting in the hallway. My face is swollen, like my teeth hurt. Like, if my tongue touched my teeth, I was in agony. I remember just sitting there, and then loads of these old people just kept coming and asking me questions, like, "What happened to you?" And I'm like, I don't need this. I don't want to talk about this.
How old were you?
16, 17.
Oh, yeah.
And I just was like, this is not where I want to be. And obviously quite early in my faith journey as well. And I remember kind of them becoming a real recluse. I'm like, I was quite an extroverted person, really loved being around people. And I just didn't want to leave my house, because if I left my house, I was most likely going to see the people that attacked me, because they were all out there. And I remember actually your brother was the only, one of my only friends that came around to see me and see how I was. And we sat and we played FIFA for a bit. But while he was there, I actually got a phone call from the police, and I'd given them names and I knew there was a video camera, and they said there wasn't enough evidence and they were dropping it. And I just remember that being like, but okay, so there's what? It was like, there's no justice almost in that sense. But the long-term effects of that were that even as an adult, like when we were together, I was in my 20s, I remember we were walking around town and I saw one of them and I had an anxiety attack.
Wow.
Like they hadn't even seen me and they probably wouldn't even recognize me. I had a beard and things, which I didn't have when I was 16, 17. And like I had an anxiety attack. We had to leave. We had to go home because I couldn't be in town anymore because I wasn't safe. And that lasted a long time. And I think, I had a lot of prayer about it. Actually, before I went to Kenya, I remember there was a session where Derek, who was the pastor that was leading us on this trip, he kind of asked us is there anything we needed to sort out with God? And this was one of those things. God's angry at God. Like, why has this happened? Like, what did I do to deserve this almost? And I don't think that was the plan, but it's
what did God say to you when you asked that?
See, this is the thing. I don't really know. I don't think I think I still let my anger control that situation rather than letting God into that situation. And I said all the right things to make it seem like I'd sorted it out. Obviously, I knew how to make people think that I'd was okay with it, but I wasn't. And actually, when I went to university that everything kind of popped out, and I realised that I needed to kind of deal with some stuff.
You're quite good at repressing.
I am amazing at repressing. Like, just stick it down there, it'll be fine. I don't need to
real time.
just tighten that a little bit more. We don't need to worry about that, because that's how my family grew up. In terms of mental health, we didn't talk about it. Like, it was you just get on with it. Kind of like that kind of working class. My dad's a lorry driver, and all of my dad's family are like lorry drivers. And it's like,
my dad was a lorry driver.
Yeah, we don't talk about feelings.
He gets mad when I say that. If he listens to this, he'll be mad that I've said that.
Oh yeah,
because for the majority of his life he was a lorry driver, and then to honour him, his last few years he was a videographer.
Yeah,
and my lasting memory is of my dad being a lorry driver. But when I say it, he's like, I wasn't a lorry driver. And I'm like, well, you did do it for quite a long time.
Well, my dad's retired twice and gone back to lorry driving twice. Like, he's still doing. He's like 70 something, and he's still lorry driving. But and actually, one amazing thing that happened with him, like just jumping forward, but I will come back, is when I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety and put on antidepressants. I was terrified to tell him,
right? Because
I had this idea of how that side of my family was.
So how did you get to that point of?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll jump back.
Diagnosed and stuff.
So it was kind of like at uni, I was in this play, and there was a point where
What did you do at uni?
I had musical theatre.
Okay, where at?
Bournemouth.
All right.
Yeah.
I went to the Erdag Academy.
Oh, really? Nice. So I was there and we were doing this play, and it had been written for us, and it was about kind of 1980s gang and culture. And there was a point where we had to jump this guy, and there was about 10 of us jumping him, and it was part of the play.
Yeah.
And I remember we did it, and I was like, oh, that felt a bit weird. And then our director was like, no, we really, you need to be angry at him. You need to dig deep and find this. And I remember we did this probably like 10, 15 times. And then we took a break, and I remember I walked in, I got a drink, and I just burst into tears, and I was like, "This, I need to talk to someone about this," but I still didn't, because I'm an idiot. And it was then
You're not an idiot.
Oh no, but
you were frightened.
Yeah. But then when I was working for Wycliffe Bible translators, stuff got to a point where in my relationship with my mum that then led to the bottle being opened and allowing myself to think and feel a lot of stuff. So my mum, I have to try and do this really sensitively. My mum got involved in some theology that I don't agree with. It's very turn or burn. It's hell. It's more, in her opinion, like hell was mentioned more in the Bible than anything else. And it's like, well, that's not true. That's not Jesus's main mission. Wasn't trying to scare people. And it got really intense, actually. And it was through that time and it was the kind of beginning of the pandemic, that my mental health really took a nosedive. And then I was just crying all the time and didn't want to leave the house. I was scared to pick up the phone to my mum even, because I was like, I can't deal with her being aggressive at me because I'm not believing faith in the same way she is believing. And that hurt, because it was my mum that obviously brought me to faith, and we were always really close and we always understood that. And then this sudden switch in her belief system was really jarring. And yeah, I had effectively a mini mental breakdown, and I went to the doctor, and they kind of diagnosed me with depression, anxiety, and put me on antidepressants then.
But you felt shame about that as well, right?
Well,
That's how you wouldn't tell you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. I don't think it was shame. Like, I didn't mind telling people. I've always been quite open with my mental health with most people.
Right.
But I think with my dad, because of that like working class background, I'd hardly ever hugged him. Like, we'd only ever hugged a few times, and like it was kind of like, how do I go about telling him this without him being ashamed of me or whatever? Because that's what my mum's approach was. She was terrified that I was being lost to drugs because I was on antidepressants. I was like, well, no, that's the whole point. It's trying to level me out so that I can actually get my head straight, rather than being this kind of mess of a person that's terrified to answer the front door.
Right.
And but it was amazing. I spoke to him and my stepmom, and he was like, oh, okay, fine. And it turned out he'd been on antidepressants for a little bit. And he was like, we don't call them antidepressants, we call them happy pills. I was like, and it was clearly a God moment, because like I didn't know about that side of him. And he was just so like, oh, it's fine. You just need to do it. Like, you need to make sure that you're okay. And his reaction was like the polar opposite of my mum, who was a Christian. And my dad's not a Christian. He has no faith. And that for me was like, kind of amazing. And then I went through therapy, and it turned out like a lot of stuff that happened in my childhood, like being told I wasn't good enough, or kind of threats of physical violence and things like that happened through my childhood, that it just kind of made me this way. And I think up until that point, I think that's why my relationship with God was a bit kind of at arm's length, because there was genuine anger in there, like, actually, but I didn't understand it, if that makes sense. And actually, it's been through kind of allowing myself to relive some of the emotions that were part of my childhood that's allowed me to kind of move forward and go deeper. And it was in December last year, wasn't it? Or November, December last year. I was working for a recruitment agency. Non-Christian charity organization.
Sorry about that.
Oh, I know. Yeah, we've spoken about that before. Yeah, I know.
It sucks.
Yeah, but I was working for this recruitment agency in the charity sector, and it was great. But like, I was still in my probation period, and I'd hit my targets that they'd set me.
Yeah.
But I'd done it by not doing as many phone calls as they wanted, so they moved the goalposts, and then they moved them again and again, and it was overwhelming, and life was just a bit hard, off the back of the pandemic and things.
It was feeding into that narrative that you weren't good enough.
Yeah, it really was.
And having to provide, because I think you'd, like you were saying with your mum, like you'd had this financial instability. So from the age of, as soon as you could get a job, you were financially and emotionally trying to support.
Oh, I was paying her rent.
And support the family. And then we got married young and had kids. So then it was you were a Christmas temp at John Lewis when we had our first child.
Yeah.
And so within 6 months, you built yourself up to manager, because it was like, I have to provide, I have to earn, I have to do this. And that constant pressure.
Yeah, and I think I put a lot of that on myself. But kind of come November last year, I had another breakdown, and this was a bit bigger. And spoke to a doctor, and it was amazing news. They didn't even hesitate. They just were like, right, you need a month off. And they put me in a month off work for the whole of December. And during that time, I kind of was keeping my boss in the loop and things. And some of the comments showed me that they didn't understand mental health. Like, I've got a nice house, I've got a lovely wife and 2 lovely children. I've got nothing to be sad about. I'm like, none of those issues are the reasons I'm sad. Like, then I know, and it's like, but you don't. And she's like, yeah, I've never had it, but if I was you, I'd just pull myself together. And I remember sitting there and just being like, Lord, like, what am I doing? This is not where I'm supposed to be, clearly. And we spoke about it and prayed about it. And I remember saying to you quite clearly, I don't think I can go back. I don't know what we're going to do,
Yeah.
but I don't think I can go back. And because they'd kept me on my probation and they kept moving it, I only had a week's notice. So I gave that and finished in January.
So how's that sort of impacted the family life? What's been the experience for you, Fi, and for the kids?
Yeah.
Like, have you kept it away from them? Like, how have you dealt with that? Like, both, I'm interested in both as a family, but also as a Christian family, like, how's it been at church?
Yeah. I think, well, with the kids, or with our elders particularly, we're trying to just in general create a really open narrative about mental health, which was part of the problem, I think, for me as a child, was I didn't have the words to put to what I was feeling. It wasn't like, I know that if I had been able to talk to my mum about it, there definitely would have been help and support and she would have done whatever she needed to do. Yeah. But because I couldn't say like, oh, well, it was my normal. So to be able to say that, whereas now there's so much more education about it in schools and everything. So part of it is just not necessarily specifically for us or our circumstance, because it's walking that line between wanting the kids to feel like they have a safe and secure, emotionally stable environment to grow up in for their emotional development, but also to say it's okay to feel sad, or when we're anxious, this is what we can do. These are some tools. Because actually I'm very hesitant to, when Florrie says she's worried about something, to say, I never say, well, the Bible says we don't have to worry, because that was said to me. And although it's true, it was so damaging because you can't just say that. And that's why I can't cope when people...
There's one thing that's true, we all damage our children.
Yeah, I know. And you have to sort of accept that anyway.
Like, it doesn't matter what you do, they're going to be sat in a seat in 30 years. Yeah. But my mum, she never would say
yeah, she'd never say
She'd never tell me not to worry. So I just worried all of you.
I worried more.
You can't win, right?
You absolutely can't.
All you can do is make them feel loved and safe.
Exactly. And so you like, I say, so instead of saying like, oh, well, we can trust in Jesus not to worry, I'll say, right, here are some ways we can kind of like look at what you're worrying about and say, kind of put it in perspective, work and like really secular, like CBT kind of tools, because I didn't have that as a child. And actually when I did kind of come through my anxiety was through medication and therapy. And I did have, my therapist was a secular therapist, but she was also a Christian, which helped when I was trying to unpick like the sort of OCD and the God thoughts, because she kind of would get that. But it was very much, I needed to disentangle it. So with Florrie, I'll say like, okay, so you're worried about this on the news, right? Well, let's see how we can kind of put that in perspective. How likely is that to happen to you? But also, people do die, and she's like really worried about it. I'm like, okay, well, we do die, but then let's talk about heaven and let's talk about this. And she goes to me, she's like, Mummy, I'm so excited for when Jesus will bring heaven down. And I'm like, yes, Florrie. It's like, because she's got a good view of, a positive view of it. It's not something to be afraid of.
And we remind her and even Ren now, like if they're feeling angry or they're sad, it's like it's okay to feel those emotions.
It's not okay to bite your sister, but it is okay.
It's okay to act it out.
To feel it.
I don't think that I was ever kind of told that. It's like, well, you stop doing that.
Feel your feelings. They're
Stop feeling that. And that was, that's where the repression comes from. That's why I'm a pro. Shoving it down. Yeah. But like, we want them to feel all of their emotions. Like, we want them to feel that they're in a safe environment where they can be angry or they can be sad, not causing anyone else damage or anything else, but actually kind of, this is okay to feel sad about something, or it's okay to feel angry about it. And that's not something we had.
So I think you are both talking about an area that the church with a capital C has done some good in and has done some not so good in. Yeah. In that, my experience of mental health in the church has been that individuals have been incredibly supportive. Yeah. But big picture message has been like, you don't have enough faith. Like, why are you worried? You've got a God, there's heaven, Just have the eternal perspective, which is what we're talking about, is the hope. Yeah. But how, and this is actually really happening to me, and keep telling me not to feel anxious. just makes me feel more.
Don't think.
Yeah,
It's fine. I won't.
Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah.
No, just stop it. I mean, that's the simple thing with therapy, isn't it? The whole point is, we'll just stop.
Yeah.
If it was that easy,
Yeah.
I would just stop.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me what your experience has been from your faith community and church, not as a judgment, but more of a like what is I want to have the conversation so that we can learn, as a community, as everybody watching, like how should we face into mental health?
I think first thing we always said on our podcast as well is that we're not mental health experts.
Yeah.
We just talk from our own experiences as people with mental health issues.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of twofold. So in terms of what we do with This Hope, it's threefold. So it's like we talked a lot on what I call the plan, because everything has to have 3 Ps or like 7 Cs.
Wait, I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. Let me see if I can show it to the camera. We didn't talk at all, did we?
No, not about the 3 Ps.
Right. And I did P.P.P. before we started. You see it?
Yeah.
I did not.
Amazing.
Right? And then I thought, what's the 3 Ps for?
What's the okay, right? These are John. I'll tell you the 3 Ps.
Well,
Theology
So,
student here. Here we go.
The first one is the plan. So that's understanding God's ultimate plan. So that's talking about heaven and this eternal perspective. That's what we've covered a lot of already. The second is the person, which is the person of Jesus Christ. And for me, that is one of the most beautiful things that I'm really in awe of at the minute, is the fact that God himself took on flesh so that he could live our human experience from the inside out. And approaching Christmas, I just get weepy when I think about, I'm like, this little baby is God, and he's come so that he could experience every ounce of like death and pain and suffering. And then when Jesus was resurrected, he was resurrected and remained human. So it's not that Jesus then became like a kind of deity that wasn't in flesh. When Jesus went back up to the life of the Trinity, he took our humanity with us. So Jesus is still human. He remains human when he was ascended back into heaven. And I'm like, that is so incredible, because it makes a difference when somebody has gone through the same thing as you. And so an example I use is when my mum had just died, I met a friend called Freddie. She has the most incredible story, but it's really sad. And the gist of it is that when she was about 12, 13, she lost both her parents to cancer within a year of each other. And she ended up in foster care. And by a brilliant God coincidence, she was fostered by my parents' best friends who lived down the road from us. So she started living there just as my mum died. And everybody was like checking in. How are you? What's going on? Like, can I do anything? It'll get better. And I didn't believe any of them. But when I met Freddie and I was talking to her about it, I remember being in tears and just going to her, does it get better? And she went, yeah, it does. And I believed her because she had lived it, not once, but twice. And I believe it made a difference because she had lived that same experience. And so Jesus taking on flesh is him being that friend. It's him having that lived experience. His friends, he saw his friends die and suffer and suffered himself. And so that meant he's our salvation. He's a massive part of the plan. He is the plan. Yeah. But the fact that he is a person is huge. And then the third P, which is slightly crowbarred, I'm not super comfortable with it, is the practice, which is the practice of lament and vulnerability. And actually, that's one of the things that as a community, I'd say, I would totally agree with you, individuals are great.
Yeah.
But I don't think the church, as you say, with a capital, is great at communal lament, communal vulnerability.
What do you mean by lament?
Lament. So the idea that you can go to God, like in the Psalms, and say, God, this is awful. This is not okay. I hate this. Why is this happening? I'm angry. I'm devastated. So when you read the Psalms, like half of them are like that, or half of each individual Psalm is like that.
There's always like a really nice and yet.
And yet, exactly.
That's what they all do.
It's like the and yet.
They just flip it on a word.
And then.
But it's like you need to be able to voice that with God, but also lamenting in like ancient Jewish culture, it was a communal thing. You would come together when somebody died or when somebody was grieving or going through something. You would weep together. And I've had some really beautiful experiences with Christians, like who I didn't know very well, I met through college. And I was overwhelmed with some, like a wave of grief at one point. And they were like, are you okay? I was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I went and sat down. They're like, no, are you okay? And I was like, no, this and this, all this stuff with my mum had come to the surface. And this group of girls that I'd only known them for a year, but equally I'd only seen them like twice at these residentials. They just all sat with me and they just cried with me. They didn't know my mum. They hardly knew me, but they were just heartbroken for me. And then as a group, we kind of brought that heartbreak to God. I have a brilliant theologian. He's called Dr. Freddie Headley. He's one of the faculty at my college again, and he wrote his
More good grades.
Yeah, I've already done his course.
We're only joking.
I've already done his course
cool.
though. He wrote his PhD in Lamentations, and he talks all about the right to reply to God in a covenant relationship. We're in this covenant relationship with God, and as a part of that, we have a right to reply to him in all our anger and our grief and everything. And I won't do it justice, I won't go into it. Read his PhD. But it's just so beautiful. In any relationship, it's okay to vent, and it makes a difference to be vulnerable. But I'm not sure that vulnerability has
made it to the church.
Paramount in the church.
Yeah, I think it has. We just get into weird theological debates about stuff that to me seemingly are, I call them B subjects, but maybe the Z subjects of like, I want to come back to who Jesus is, what God's plan is for my life.
Yeah.
I know that when I sit in God's plan for my life, I do things like write 3 P's down on a piece of paper. Don't know why.
Yeah.
Literally, I was praying, went P, P, P.
Yeah.
And then you said that. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I've never heard you say that before.
No, yeah.
I've not watched any of your podcasts that say that.
Yeah.
So that's complete prophetic. And Trevor, I just want to say something to you. I thought it when you were talking. I asked you what God had said, and you said you weren't sure.
Yeah.
And I just felt God speak to me a little bit. And do you know the poem Footprints in the Sand?
Yeah.
And I just could see you thinking well, where were you? Because there's only one set of footprints.
Yeah. No.
And I just heard God say to me I was weeping with you, son.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I was always there.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to encourage you with that. I know you probably know that.
No, it's great to hear. And actually, I'm working with Mercy UK at the moment. Incredible charity. If people don't know who they are, look them up. They're the people that made the Keys to Freedom course. I'm actually doing their Freedom program, which is a bit more intensive, and going through that and getting back to the practice of actually listening to God. And literally, we were talking about the steps to intimacy. Yesterday, it was literally yesterday morning before we left, and that kind of attraction, then you get to know God, and then you learn to trust God, then you learn to love God, and then you have intimacy with him. And I think looking back at my life, I can see all of those moments where maybe I was still getting to know who God was as a character in my life. And it was probably in those moments where I'm like, well, where are you? And that's because I'm I've heard all this stuff at church, and you're not here. But clearly, you're so right. That
I just heard the "Where are you?" and I just heard God say,
that's
I was
amazing.
weeping with you, and I was like, I didn't know if I was going to say it afterwards or during.
Appreciate it.
And I don't consider myself prophetic. I'm an evangelist. I had this great experience of God, and I want everybody else to have the same, thing is really my thing. But
I appreciate that. Thank you.
A bit of a sidestep, but God loves you.
There's always room for God, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's always room.
Amen. If we can't do it now, we can't do it at all. So let's talk about this hope. So, I want to know, how did it start, and how is God using you? Because it's all right to have 3 Ps and a name, but tell me, what is God really doing? Do you know what I mean? Because you're now starting to slicken it up a bit, which is good, and we need that. And if we are going to evangelize to people that don't know Christ, you can't, you have to bring them into relationships. So that's all good. But tell me what really happened. What has God been saying to you?
Well, it all came back to that end of my story, in that December where I was off work and a bit lost. And we were praying about things, and we spoke about it. We're like, why don't we do it? Like, why don't we have a business that focuses on faith and health and mental health?
I think I said, why don't you have a passion project?
Yeah, I needed a passion project.
I was like, take a year off work. We'll sell a car.
Which we did. So
And
two cars.
so that we could have some money to live off of for a few months.
Yeah.
I said, do something that makes your heart like sing, to have a passion project and just give it a go.
And I immediately said, let's use your artwork. Sophia's an artist. It's like her mother. And you'd started a business called This Hope previously, which was your artwork, your lettering. And we kind of looked at that. And from my point of view as well, like, so I go to Christian Vision for Men event called The Gathering.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a really...
Carl is one of my dearest friends.
I
Is
love
it?
that guy so much.
So
like,
I big shout out to Carl.
yeah,
He's struggling with his own battles at the
I was
moment.
going to say, yeah.
But incredible guy. I work with him at the Message Trust. And
Oh, yeah. He shared so amazingly at The Gathering this year. And yeah, him and Steve Legg as well. Absolutely incredible. But like, I realized there was like these 2,000 men in a field. And we thought about our church and the husbands and that don't always come to the church, and there was like a gap in the market. You look at like Cheerfully Given as an outlet, there's not really many Christian gifts and stuff in there for men that aren't just like a bit of leather or an axe, you know. And so we kind of wanted to put together a brand that was kind of inclusive of men and women,
And especially men's conversations with mental health as well.
yeah, it's not
I
something
know
that's
that
always there.
me and my friends tend to be better at talking to one another about how they're feeling. And you're getting so much better, but it is
I'm getting
that
better
taking that step of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so we wanted something that wasn't just targeted mostly at women, which
Yeah.
is probably what I'd done before.
Yeah, well, yeah, makes sense.
yeah.
But you had the verse already, didn't you, in Hebrews? And I can never remember which chapter it's in, but you know it better than me.
What?
You-
6-9.
6-9.
6-9. Oh, I can't remember. You're putting me on the spot now. We have this hope as an anchor for our soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a picture in here somewhere that says it.
Oh, really?
It's on the wall there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is literally, that was the start point, and we prayed about it.
God is screaming at you guys today.
Yeah, it's so
I'm just saying.
oh, and
So good.
and that's amazing.
You're on the right path, guys.
Well, that was it. It was that was the start point. Like, actually, yeah, we have an anchor, and we thought about kind of mental health in terms of, you know, you go through these storms, but if you have faith and you have a relationship with God, you know that there is hope. You know that He's with you in that storm. And actually, one of the things that I really loved was the image of a hurricane from above. It's all this craziness, but in the center, there's this moment of calm where you can see it from the top of the picture, where there's just like a moment where there's nothing going on in there. And, you know, it's when you're in those storms and you get to that point, you know that you're with God because He's got you. You know that it's going to be a tough
It's
journey
still
again.
going on around
yeah.
you, yeah.
You're not. It's not suddenly magically cured. He's not a magician.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus didn't stop the storm
Yeah.
when he
Yeah.
got in the boat with the disciples.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fi, what would you say to people at home at the moment that are in that storm, that can't see God, have doubt,
Yeah.
are hurting, can't talk about what they're talking about?
Yeah.
What would you say to encourage them today?
I mean, I would say there is hope, even if you don't feel like it. I mean, one of our kind of principles is we believe that in Jesus there is hope for the hopeless. But it's okay to just, that's part of the lament. It's okay to go, God, I cannot feel you. I can't see you in this at all. I am broken. I'm hurting. I'm at my end. And that's a brilliant starting place. And that is a
I guess what
biblical
you're
starting
saying,
place.
if you don't know what to pray,
Yeah.
just pray that.
Yeah.
God, where are you? I
Yeah.
need you. I don't know what to
Yeah.
pray.
And that's actually a really biblical starting point as well. You don't have to, you can, if you read a psalm, even like if you need somebody else's words, that's fine. Like if you need to, I found when Mum was dying and like towards the end, I just didn't have the words at all. I didn't necessarily have the faith for her to be healed, but I felt, I just rested in the fact that other people were praying. I rested in the fact that the Spirit would be interceding for me. that I didn't have to be, I could just sit, and in my sorrow, in my lament, that God would be hearing that. But also a part of what we do with our podcast, because that was thing, it's like I do hand lettering, I do church communications, I like graphic design, that's my thing. But actually sometimes giving somebody a thing that says, do not worry, or consider the lilies, like, it's great, but it can't just be that. Which is why we wanted the podcasts and to do some written materials as well, to kind of actually put the theology and the kind of teaching behind it. And so that's what we kind of 50% of what we do on the podcast is actually just talking to people, interviewing them, asking for their stories of hope, and people just share their stories in the storms, and actually just being encouraged by hearing other people's testimonies and knowing that one way or the other you all have the same, whether it's restoration in whatever circumstance this side of heaven or beyond. So you're not just working on
and we kind of made the decision as well to find people that are at different stages of that storm. There were people that are kind of maybe come out of the main part of the big storm, or there's some people still in it as well and going through that. And we wanted that because it's not spoken about in a church environment. Actually, the feedback we've got from just people in our church that have listened to it is like, just thank you for doing this. Like, you're being so brave. And it's like, we don't feel like we're being brave because it's something that we want to talk about and we feel that God's telling us to go forward with. But like,
I think you would always dismiss that because you're a very brave person. If you consider what you've been through, to put yourself out in public is one of the bravest things you can do, and the most anxiety provoking things. So
weirdly, don't not mess with my anxiety.
Don't back that away, because it is incredibly brave.
But it's just like, the response has been like, thank you, this is what I've needed.
Well, our vicar came on the podcast and he shared his journey with anxiety through leading the church to foster that vulnerability. And he's leading from the front with that vulnerability. And so kind of in our own smaller context, we're seeing changes and that happening.
And like, one of the things that I'm like really like amazed by, so we've got groups of friends that aren't Christians that they listen whenever we drop an episode. They listen. They told us like, we sit around and we have a cup of tea and we listen. And I'm just like, that's incredible as well. Like, God is moving in non-Christian circles through these stories.
It's hope that the world can't give.
No, exactly.
And so when they're facing things, then maybe when they're feeling hopeless, they'll go, hang on, Fi and Trevor were talking something about that.
And that's what we just want this to be a vehicle that people can come to and hear something and go, do you know what, that resonates with this part of my story, and okay, if they can do it, I need to do it. I can pray, and I know that God will be with me, and that's for us. That's all we're trying to do. Share a little bit of hope in a world that is hopeless.
And you can see that more and more. Well, I just want to thank you both for doing what you do. Encourage you to keep doing that. I encourage everybody at home to go and check out, Trevor and Fi, This Hope. Where can they find the podcast?
So it's on Spotify,
it's on
Apple. It's all the main ones.
Okay.
But you can also find it on our website, which is wehavethishope.co.uk.
Cool. Our producers can put a link on.
Nice.
I was going to say I'll make sure there's a link by one.
You've got producers. When I say that, I actually have to be the one doing it. Yeah.
That's why I was like, I have to be authentic in it. I think we've come to a good place to stop, because I don't want to give away all the treasure, because I want people to go on a bit of treasure hunt, listen to your podcast, fall in love with you just like I have. So I've got a few thank yous, Thank you to you guys, but also we have Noah and Rich in the back who have taken the time to do my producer notes, to invite you, to make all the arrangements, but also make sure that what people are hearing and seeing today is recorded and done really well. So just thank you to them.
Guys.
And just thank you to our faithful audience, because when everybody at home listens and likes and subscribes and does all the things they're supposed to do, it really does help us get the message out there. So I really want to encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go and check you out, learn more about This Hope and what is going on. But yeah, like God is on this. He clearly is.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about it in a minute. But just thank you for sharing and being honest and open with everything you've been through and holding it together, I guess. That's what you said at the beginning, right? I need to hold it together.
Hold it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you did more than that, and you were great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back again soon with more Together podcasts and adventures with Christians, just finding out more about what God is doing in them and through them. And we hope that it encourages you and blesses you. And we'll see you next time.